I lived next to this one kid who always had bandages wrapped around his whole head, even covering their face. I remembered his name was Wilbur, a 12-year-old boy who never left his house. He sometimes looked out his window on the top floor at all the kids who would play outside, while Wilbur sat inside and watched. I remembered his windows had metal bars on them, so there was no way he can climb out of his bedroom windows. We sometimes communicated to each other by writing each other notes on pieces of paper, since Wilbur couldn't hear me because the window's being locked. Wilbur only does it when his parents aren't around, since they're weird. His mother and father were one of those parents who were insanely crazy about science and chemistry, according to Wilbur. They would stay in their basement and work all day and night, except at the times where they had to give Wilbur some food daily. Now they're not treating him like an animal. His parents are just very busy. They told Wilbur that he shouldn't go outside and make contact with anyone else until his face got better. He told me that he accidentally slipped on one of his parents' chemicals and that it fell on his face first, ruining his appearance. His parents fear that he would be made fun of by the other kids in the neighborhood. One time, a couple older kids were throwing rocks at pebbles at his windows, laughing and pointing at Wilbur as he looked down on them. He told me that they did this a few times, and he's just gotten used to it. But to me, he's a great guy, and he still is today. I have never been inside his house, but he showed me some cool stuff he collected, like comic books. He had loads of them, from Marvel to DC to other non-superhero comics. He was a huge superhero fan. He even said that he felt like a superhero, a normal being who came affected by dangerous chemicals and became a super powerful hero. He once wrote on a piece of paper and had put it on his window. He pretended to be a superhero. I had a collection of action figures and video games that amazed Wilbur. He told me that he'd never played a single video game in his life, which is quite sad. He told me that his babysitter took them away before he could play them and burnt them in front of him. Wilbur had a mean babysitter named Miss Fitzgerald, a tall, mean lady who never liked kids at all. This started before his face became messed up. He told me, "She was basically every kid's nightmare of all the things I heard she has done. Miss Fitzgerald had babysitted many kids before, and trust me, it was not pretty." Wilbur told me that the last kid she babysat for was a 4-year-old girl. She made her live through 7 hours of hell. Wilbur said that Miss Fitzgerald starved her and surrounded her bed by a few bear traps. And worse than that happened, her parents didn't even know that she was doing this. She would lie to them just to get paid. All those things I've heard. She is a foul, cruel woman with no soul. And now, she had to babysit this poor guy. Wilbur was old enough to make his own decisions, except for some, but his parents apparently hired an evil witch. The parents had to go to Texas to a science convention, so Wilbur was left all alone with her. One time, I was writing about her to show him, but then I saw Miss Fitzgerald forcefully pulling him away from the window, and then the rest of the day without talking to him. The next day, when I looked through the window to see Wilbur, I saw someone lying down on his bed, looking at the person's wrapped head. I banged my fist on the window, trying to get Wilbur's attention. He slowly sat up, wiping the tears away from his eyes. He seemed to be crying, which gave me a thought. I had been worried to look on my face as I saw bruises all over his arms and legs, a faded dark tone of purple. He went to write something down on a piece of paper. Then as Wilbur finished writing, he went up to the window and pressed the note on the glass. What he wrote terrified me. The whole situation burnt in the back of my mind. Something I knew I'd never forget. He wrote, "Help me." What made it even worse was it was scribbled onto a piece of paper and almost illegible. Wilbur kept banging on the window with another hand. Then suddenly, I saw someone else in his bedroom next to him. It was her. You know who. She had something in both of her hands. In one hand was a lemon, and the other was a pair of scissors. What Miss Fitzgerald did terrified me even more. Miss Fitzgerald ran up to Wilbur, grabbing his head, holding it still. I saw him screaming in pain, and I knew that I had to do something. At that time, I couldn't stop watching. She used her scissors to cut open the bandages and unwrap them off his head. What I saw almost made me vomit, something that sickened me. I was utterly shocked by Wilbur's real, deformed face. His head was completely covered by bandages, and what I saw underneath, I knew the purpose too. I saw his face almost melted off, showing a dark red layer underneath. I could imagine his face looking like a melted cheese on a cheeseburger. Wilbur's whole face, even his eyeballs, were burnt a bit. The chemicals had messed him up badly. Miss Fitzgerald sliced Lemon in half with the scissors, pinning Wilbur down on his bed. Then she threw the scissors to the side, next to the bandages, and held his head with one hand. In the other hand, she squeezed lemon slice onto Wilbur's head, into his eyes, onto the red layer of his face. The painful expression he made on his face, his loud, muffled screams, his face stinging from the acid of the lemon juice. She used another lemon to squeeze onto his face, torturing Wilbur with extreme pain. I decided to bang my fist on the window, which was a bad idea. Miss Fitzgerald looked over at the window, right at me. I jumped back when she noticed me. She ran back out of the bedroom, shoving Wilbur down and screaming in pain and agony. I knew that she was going to do, so I ran out of my bedroom and ran downstairs. The good thing was that about this situation was my parents don't know about Wilbur and the fact that they were at work for a little while. I locked the front door, hoping that Miss Fitzgerald wouldn't burst into my house. I looked around for the house phone, but as I was, a loud bang rang in my ears. I looked behind myself at the door, noticing her sweat, ready face and her curly blonde hair. By looks in her eyes, I knew there was going to be some trouble. She kept banging at the door, nearly screaming her head off. As I looked for the phone, I finally spotted it, next to the couch on the coffee table. I ran towards it, dialing 911 as the sounds of Miss Fitzgerald's threatening screams were outside. Waiting for a few rings, I finally hear the operator's voice, the usual greeting from a 911 operator. I started explaining the whole situation from beginning to end as quickly and as clear as possible. They told me to wait patiently and the police would arrive at my house soon. It took a few minutes for the police to arrive at my house. Not only did they arrive, but they called my parents home and they arrived early from work. Apparently, they explained the whole situation and they decided to come home early. My parents were extremely worried and frightened. They asked me more questions than the police did. I had to explain everything from being friends with Wilbur to how his parents left him with an abusive babysitter and what she tried to do. About an hour later, a police officer came to me. He had something he wanted to tell me about the horrible atrocities that took place next door. The truth is about the babysitter, the parents, and Wilbur was truly shocking. Based on the evidence they found, Wilbur's parents weren't actually his parents at all. They adopted Wilbur from an orphanage that's out of town, only to perform an experiment on him. It was the reason why they moved to Texas, to hide. The babysitter, Miss Fitzgerald, was a part of the experiment too. In fact, Wilbur wasn't the first kid who got adopted by the scientists. They had done a legal experiment on orphans, and it was to find out how much pain a child can deal with before death, caused unto the death of their age of the child. 38 children between the ages of 2 and 13 were reported missing, and Wilbur was one of them. There were security cameras outside the house and inside the house. Right now they arrested Miss Fitzgerald for childly cruelty and deaths of many children, and are on the case to find the two scientists. All of that, and I was friends with someone who could have been killed if I didn't call the police. Apparently Wilbur tried to lie almost about everything he told me. He was just trying to protect himself. A married couple who lived out of town. Since then, I never saw him again. Until now. 20 years later, I went to a bar to get myself a few drinks by myself. A man approached me. "Remember me?" he said, a familiar man smiling at me. I smiled back and realized how long it's been since I seen Wilbur. In fact, he looked nice, a healthy man now. With brown hair and blue eyes, he almost looked like a complete stranger. After that, we drank a few glasses, finally speaking to each other in person. Wilbur and I knew that nobody would try to keep us apart, the scientists and the babysitter. After all, I still couldn't stop thinking about the fact what would have happened to that man if I let him get killed, and if I didn't help him save his own life.